All right, the Hangout on Air is live. Let me start the recording as well. All right, this is Arun Gupta. I work for Red Hat, and today with me I have Reza Rahman. Hello, Reza.
Hi there.
Excellent. Very nice to see you.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
let's see, what is this about? So let's switch to a browser in that case, and then we're going to go here, and this is part of the webinar series that I've been doing with the different leaders in the Java EE land. We have done 4 webinars so far. Today we are going to talk about domain-driven design with Java EE, and I'm particularly very excited with my ex-colleague and a great friend Reza Rahman on talking about domain-driven design. So if we click here, then we can see, sort of the history. The slides are already available, PPT is downloadable, sort of stuff. But typically, our focus is less slides, a lot more code, so that we can have a more engaging conversation over here. Okay. So let's go back to our Hangout here then. All right. So Reza, take it away.
Okay, excellent. So, do you have any questions for me to start with? On why I'm doing this or what this is about?
Tell us about yourself.
Okay, excellent. So, I've been a part of the Java EE community for a long time. I'm an early adopter of Java EE. I've been doing this since 1.3, to my recollection. I'm still one of the earliest people that I know that actually developed a servlet and deployed it back there on something called IBM DominoGo, which was the predecessor to WebLogic. So long story short, I'm now evangelist at Oracle, hopefully primarily focusing on Java EE. It's been my passion for a long time, and I really enjoy it, and hope that we see Java EE continue to be successful for another decade. We hope.
Excellent. Yeah, we do too. At Red Hat, we passionately care about Java EE, and in that sense, Oracle and Red Hat is a great partnership. It goes together hand in hand.
In fact, it is. We bicker sometimes, but in reality, we are very much tied at the navel. In fact, we're even tied at the navel, whether people realize it or not, with people like Pivotal as well. We bicker quite a bit, and we have turf wars, but in reality, it's a symbiotic relationship.
Yeah. Those turf wars are very healthy though, because we work together on the specs, and then we compete on the implementation, which makes it healthy for the developers and customers, which is good.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome. Okay, so tell us about the topic today. What you're gonna do, and take us away.
Okay, principally, I want to, I guess, share my passion about a particular topic. And the topic is marrying together domain-driven design and Java EE. This is something that actually has been on my radar for a number of years. In fact, before I joined Oracle. The project that I'll talk to you today about is actually something I was thinking of starting independent of Oracle. In fact, this was probably going to be the topic of my next book. If you look around the website, you'll see sort of reflections of a book title, namely Applied Domain-Driven Design Blueprints for Java EE. So why is it? Why is this important to me? I was an adopter of the core J2E blueprints. Some people would call it the pet store. In reality, the pet store is the implementation. The actual design patterns behind it is actually the core J2E patterns. It's a book out there that hopefully a lot of people out there have read. But from when I shifted from J2EE to Java EE, or more specifically, I guess from J2E plus Spring, from classical J2E, I actually left behind the J2E design patterns as well. And what I adopted is this thing called domain-driven design. It's about 10 years old. And in my opinion, it leads to much better architected systems than you would end up with in core J2E patterns. There's a lot of literature out there, comparing and contrasting what these two architecture paradigms are. And like I say, in my opinion, this is better. It's a cleaner approach. It's more modern. And it actually focuses you on the architecture as opposed to necessarily the plumbing of the technology. But at the end of the day, the technology is important, right? As much as I believe in domain-driven design, I believe in Java EE a bit more. And to my pleasant surprise, at least as of EE6, there's been a very good marriage. It's very possible to align domain-driven design and Java EE. It's possible to write very elegant systems, Java EE systems that use domain-driven design. In my personal opinion, actually, I regard Java EE to be one of the most ideal fits for domain-driven design because there's a lot of philosophical underpinnings that are basically the same between domain-driven design and Java EE. What I did when I joined Oracle is, put together a proposal to say, hey, let me do this project. It'll be good because it'll show people how to architect modern Java EE applications using a good design paradigm, and it'll be a nice showcase application. And there isn't very many of those that you can sort of take a look at. Hey, how do all of these pieces of Java EE fit together in terms of a realistic application, and how does that end-to-end development experience actually look like? So I was able to approve that. I haven't honestly been able to put in a lot of time in it, but I think we are in good shape already. I'll continue to try to put in time into the project, and if people in the community can help us, I think that's all the better, both for the community and for this project as well. So that's a long and short of, I guess, what I'm trying to convey today.
Okay, all right, man. Then show us what you got.
Absolutely. So where should we start? Should we talk about domain-driven design a little bit, or do you think we can skip that part?
Well, I mean, a brief introduction, like maybe a slide or two on domain-driven design would be useful, and then talk about what would be relevant for the Java EE developers and how can they get started with this.
Yes. So let's do that. Here's my slides. I'm going to start sharing my screen, if that's okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so here we go. Okay, so here we are. This is the slide deck I have. I actually present this talk at conferences, and it's a relatively well-received, popular talk. A lot of people seem to be interested in this particular topic. So this is the slide deck I use. It's not a very heavy slide deck. It's relatively lightweight. The full version of it is I've shared already. On the web page for the Hangover. Do feel free to take a look at that. It's essentially a link to my SlideShare account. What I'll do today, though, is sort of a truncated version of that, and I'll start with explaining domain-driven design. The fundamental thing that makes domain-driven design unique is that it's a design technique that emphasizes upon aligning your software implementation with the real-world problem that you're trying to solve. So the goal is when you talk to a business analyst or the business or the user, the terminology that you'll use is going to be essentially the same, whether you're looking at a screen on your UI, names of fields, how fields behave, to the way your front end is architected, all the way down to the database. The idea is that it should be zero translation cost. So everything should look exactly the way it would in the real world. The software and every aspect of the implementation should be coherent with the actual business problem at hand. There's several benefits to this. One is that you wind up with a lot crisper design that's easier to understand and maintain. And it also renders itself to agility. Because what happens is when you have a disconnect between what the real-world problem that you're trying to solve and how it's implemented in code, it's very difficult to start making changes without doing a lot of reflection of the code. This is true of people that may come on new onto a project, and actually also equally true of you, the developer. Suppose you developed this bit of code and you didn't really pay too much attention to its fundamental design, and you came back to this code, let's say 6 months later. I would tell you, and I've seen this many times from personal experience, that you'll begin to understand why you did certain things the way you did. This doesn't happen when the software really does reflect the real life problem that you're trying to solve. So the question is, how does domain-driven design accomplish this? Well, the first thing is it has an objective in mind, right? So it has the stated objective that I just shared, and it also uses object-oriented development, principally object-oriented analysis and design, as an enabler to make this happen. And in fact, if you go back to the roots of object-oriented development, this is really what object-oriented development is about. It's supposed to be it's supposed to make programming easier by making it easier to implement objects, things in real life, behaviors in real life in software. Okay, so it's a very coherent set of design techniques in that way. So beyond all of that, there is some specific artifacts in domain-driven design. If you will, these are your design patterns, right? In domain-driven design. So the picture that you see on screen now is actually one of the canonical sort of images that are out there for domain-driven design that will help you explain what it really is. So I haven't created this. This is very classical in the domain-driven design literature. I'll go over these design patterns very briefly. The heart of it is really what you see towards my right-hand side of this graphic. The most important design pattern is the entity. And the entity is nothing really much more than an important noun in your system. And in fact, most systems are composed of important nouns. And entities are not really just data holders, like they are, for example, in J2EE design patterns or DTOs or sort of your database rows. Rather, an entity really is an encapsulation of both data as well as behavior. And that is actually very key if you look at object-oriented philosophy as to why object-oriented development is important and is reflective of real life. So entities can take advantage of all of the OOP paradigms, inheritance, polymorphism, abstraction, and the like. Entities have identities, and to Java EE developers, this word entity should ring a bell. And I'll tell you more about that alignment in a second. A close relative of entities is a value object. In fact, value objects really help you to better enforce the principle of encapsulation into your domain model. Really, the only distinction is an entity has an identity of its own, and a value object does not. Right? But other than that, they are virtually interchangeable. Repositories are basically a design pattern very similar to data access objects. There's some subtle differences, which I'll explain in just a second. And in order to understand that, the next design paradigm to understand is called an aggregate. Aggregates are very, in my very brief description of it today, what I'm going to say is that it is basically a way of segmenting your domain model into logical parts. Right? So if you do not have any grouping of your domain model, you can wind up with a very flat and very large domain model. So in order to avoid that problem, what you can do is make use of aggregates. So basically identify parts of your domain model that sort of belong together. Okay. And an aggregate will always have something called an aggregate root, which is an entity. Okay? So the big difference between repositories and DAOs is actually the fact that repositories act upon aggregate roots rather than entities and value objects necessarily. Okay, so that's a big difference between DAOs. DAOs is usually there's a one-to-one correlation between a table or an entity, so there's a lot more DAOs. Usually in domain-driven model systems, because they act upon groups of entities and value objects or aggregates, usually there's fewer repositories, and the repositories are a bit more intelligent. Factories, let me skip over. I don't think it's important since we want to do less lecture and more code.
Yes, we can actually jump to the code rather quickly.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Let me try and do that. So that's the basic concepts of what is in domain-driven design. The basic concepts of it. There's also an interesting concept called domain service. Again, all of this is actually, there's resources that you can take a look at to see what these really are. But in reality, a service is basically verbs. Instead of having nouns only, there's also a possibility of modeling verbs in domain-driven design, and that turns out to be actually a very important concept. Okay, let me skip over this slide. I don't think it's that important for us to understand right now, but it actually has to do with why domain-driven design is actually suddenly getting a lot more attention these days. And it has to do with microservices and how you, what the proper granularity is of designing microservices. And the nice thing about domain-driven design is this was figured out 10 years ago. And it's figured out by a concept called context maps. So basically, you can, every single bounded context can actually be a well-defined, well-understood subsection of your application that can be deployed as a distinct microservice. So this is another reason why you really should look at domain-driven design and understand what it is about. Domain-driven design does have another big commonality with core J2E patterns in terms of its layers. So these will, again, look very familiar to somebody who's familiar with core J2E patterns. It does employ layering. And the layering generally is the domain, the application, and the interface, and the infrastructure. And I'll talk about a little bit more of this when we actually take a look at the code. It's more sensible to look at the code and understanding these anyway. All right. So mapping domain-driven design to Java EE. Surprisingly, it's actually not that hard. It is very natural. And again, it has to do with the fundamental philosophical alignment between domain-driven design and Java EE. And again, we'll take a look at more of this in the code. But generally, these are the mappings. So at the interface layer, you actually have a bunch of things. The most important one being JSF, but there's a whole bunch of other Java EE APIs that fit very well in the interface layer. For the application layer, right, what's called the EJB is actually a very, very good fit. It's almost a perfect fit in the application layer. And again, I'll say why. Same thing for entities, same thing for value objects. They have very clean mappings into JPA. And of course, a majority of Java EE is actually concerned with infrastructure. And we'll see why that is. But basically, almost 80 to 90% of Java EE is concerned with providing you infrastructure services to make your domain model actually work. Okay, so I think that's all I'm going to say. Any questions?
A couple of questions actually. If you go back now, when I talk, it's focusing on me. Right. So here, no, actually, no. Go back on the mapping slide.
Mapping slide, yes. Okay. Rather, the API mappings. Here we go.
Yeah, this one. So, for example, now I see CDI is in the repositories. But shouldn't CDI sit with EJB as well at the application layer?
Yes, it absolutely can. This image is not comprehensive. I explained this in the on the website, cargotracker.java.net. This is basically a very rough mapping. In reality, CDI can play a very key role in all of these layers. Certainly in the infrastructure layer, it's very important. In the domain layer, not so much, right? Other than helping implement repositories. But yeah, CDI can absolutely be almost a replacement to EJB in the application layer. Certainly going forward, we hope that's going to be true.
Okay, and interface in that sense is something that the users are going to interface with?
Yes, and users is a very loose term in this case. So user is essentially anything that really triggers an event or an action. Right? So of course, physically the user can be clicking on buttons and filling in forms and
right.
And those, but they may also be an external system, in which case an interface is nothing much more than a JAX-RS endpoint. Same thing for WebSocket. Same thing for things like Java Patch. Same thing for an EJB scheduling bean. Those are really all those all belong in the interface layer, essentially,
Got
of
it.
domain-driven
Okay.
design.
All right. This is pretty cool, actually. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else, Arun?
No, I think this is good. It's good.
Okay. All right. So moving on, let me sort of demo the website itself. The website is probably the best place to get started with the project. So let's go ahead and do that. The URL, which is going to unfortunately be subject to a redirect, is this: cargotracker.java.net. Cargotracker, no space, java.net. Okay, so let's take a look. Here's the website. We always need help in terms of look and feel. I'm not a look and feel expert, and honestly, it's hard to find good look and feel people, but we're trying our best. I think look and feel is probably the weakest point that we have in this project today. Okay, so if you are a UI guy and this interests you, please help us. Okay, so here's the website. Won't spend too much time here. We'll go and jump into the code. A little bit of overview of what the project is about, and a little bit of the same things that we talked about before. Some goals, how to get started. This is very important. So basically, there's a couple of ways of getting started. You can get started by downloading the code as a zip file or directly from the Subversion repository and setting it up in an IDE like NetBeans. In fact, the instructions I have is really for NetBeans at this stage. I would love to have instructions in other IDEs as well. Right? So,
I also see on the website it says the project currently runs on Java EE 7 Glassfish 4.
Yes.
Is there anything in the project that is app server dependent and that would not let it run on Wildfly, for example?
Yes and no. Like all Java EE portability, I think in terms of the code, probably good 95% of it is application server independent. I can't say with 100% certainty that it's going to run as is on Wildfly. However, I do think it can be made to run, and we could make use of things like Maven profiles to figure out the deltas, the differences between Wildfly and Glassfish, and still be based on the same code base. Again, I would love a contribution putting this on Wildfly or Tommy or whatever other Java E7 app server is out there. The application is Java E7. I have gotten requests to create E6 versions of it. Obviously, given the time I have, that's challenging. But again, that would be a useful thing to do, is basically backport this application to E6.
Yeah. So, but are you saying that the application code is fully portable, but there are other configuration files that might restrict it from running on Wildfly?
Correct. For example, one obvious one would be the configuration for Jersey, right? So in Wildfly, the Jersey wouldn't be available. It would really be REST easy. So those are that's one thing that is definitely I know for sure would have to be a difference.
But what specific configuration of Jersey is required, though?
Things like where the REST endpoint is deployed, and also the JSON provider. Those would be two bits of configuration that would be different between Wildfly and Glassfish.
Okay. Well, where the REST endpoint is deployed can be done in a Java E7 way anyway, in a portable way, where you use the application path class. Well, we'll take a look at it later, but
sure.
Let's go back here. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. And in fact, it may be. I'm not saying it's not. It can't be 100%. 100% portable, but it's a big statement to say that yes, it is. Right.
Right. But that's, I think you and I can work on it offline to get it running on Wildfly as well.
Okay, absolutely. I would welcome that. Yeah, absolutely welcome that. Okay, a little bit of background. Went over some of this. A little bit of talking about how Java EE and DDD marries together. Again, we talked about some of this already. For the Java EE folks, this section I think is important. So this is, we actually wind up using quite a bit of Java EE. There's a lot of Java EE features demonstrated in this application. As I said, although the primary goal is demonstrating domain-driven design and demonstrating good architectural principles, this is actually a very good example of putting the Java EE APIs together in a realistic way as well. So I have all of the features, at least, let me take that back, not all of the features, but a majority of the features of the Java EE APIs listed here. So feel free to take a look at some of that if that interests you as well. Finally, we have all of the regular resources that you can expect. So a mailing list and all that stuff that will help you hopefully interact with us
Right.
in the project. Anything else? Any questions on any of this, Arun?
No, this is very good actually. Let's jump into the code now.
Okay. Here is the application. Before I jump into the code, let me show you a very brief overview of the application. I think this will be helpful to get started in working with the application. So I have the application up and running. It's running on Glassfish, localhost port 8080. Basically, what this application does is it tracks cargo going across the globe. Right? So you have something that you're shipping, and then you're going to give it to the shipping company. They're going to track this for you, and you can also see what's happening to your cargo. So there's several interfaces. The first one is the tracking interface. So if you go onto here, presumably you will have a tracking ID, just like you would, let's say, on a USPS tracking site. So we'll enter this here. We'll hit track, and you can see that this bit of cargo is in New York. It's gone through a few voyages. It was in Hong Kong, and then it was loaded and unloaded from Hong Kong to New York and the like. I'll show you another example that I have. This one is misdirected, but again, a few events, and it allows you to see what's going on in the cargo. Okay. The other major interface is the landing page. And this basically tells you, what is going on with this cargo right now. Okay, so all of the registered cargo items that you have are shown here on the dashboard. One of the things that I'm actually working on now is creating a more visual a dashboard like this one. Okay, so as you can see, these are dots representing all the bits of cargo that we have. This will tell you what the status of the cargo is. You can click on it, and it will take you to the details of this cargo. Again, this is something that I would love to have properly integrated into the application. One of the nice things that I can hopefully show you is that this dashboard actually uses WebSockets to do real-time updates. So I have another mobile interface here. Okay, that allows you to enter events. So to say, hey, I've loaded this bit of cargo onto this ship, and you enter that information onto the mobile interface, and the changes that happen actually will be automatically reflected on the dashboard. Okay, so let's leave that alone. In order to explain the code, I need to do a booking. So let's do that for a second. So let's say I'm going from Chicago to Tokyo, and I'm going to. This needs to arrive by, let's say, April 21st. So I do a booking. A booking is just the first step. So if I go back in here, what I'll see is that I have an unrouted cargo. This is my new tracking ID that I was assigned. The next step is actually to route this cargo. And this goes through a matching algorithm that says, okay, these are the available routes I have, and this is the parameters for the cargo. Let me try to match this up. So as you can see, there's several matches. We'll pick one of them. Okay, so now this bit of cargo is routed. I can then act upon it, and as you can see, it's moved from not routed to routed, and I can act upon it by registering events. There's another part of this application as well, and that's basically something that's in the background, scanning for events. There's a flat file that you can, a CSV file that you can upload onto a directory that will bulk upload events as opposed to doing them one by one through the mobile interface. So that's using Java Batch. Okay.
Okay.
All right. So that's that. In order to find out more about what this application does, the best thing to actually do is read the README file, which is in the Subversion repository, and we'll go through the major parts of this application. All right.
Right.
Very good. So we will. I think that's enough for this. Do you have any questions on the application itself, the behavior of the application itself, Arun? Before
It looks clean actually. So let's look at the code now.
Okay, excellent. All right. So here's the code, and I hope it's at least somewhat visible. I hope.
Yeah. The code is well readable, nicely readable.
Okay, excellent. Let me actually stop Glassfish. There's no point in just letting it run. Okay. So the code is actually quite substantial. It has about 12,000 lines of code right now, all in all, in this application. So it's a non-trivial application. But one of the nice things that you will find out as you go into this application is that although the size of the code is already non-trivial, it's relatively easy to navigate it. And the reason for this is because of the fact that we're using layering and we're using domain-driven design. And so,
is that a common facet of a domain-driven design project?
Yes, very much so. Yeah, that ultimately has a lot to do with it. It's not just about applying object-oriented analysis at the domain level, or rather at the object level, but also at the application level, right? And that means properly modularizing and trying to model how things are, and applying the principles of layered architecture and isolation of concerns on top of that. So it's very much characteristic of domain-driven design. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So if you notice, and I'll give you just a second to take a look at this, you'll see that there's actually two applications here. One is called Pathfinder, towards the bottom of these packages, and towards the top is Cargo Tracker. Cargo Tracker is the UI application that you're seeing, but in reality there's also another module to this application that's a separate application altogether. Again, a different context, and potentially these would be again deployed to two different microservices. Right? So Cargo Tracker would be one microservice application, whereas Pathfinder would be another, and they would be correlated. They would talk to each other in some way.
So are you saying that the Cargo Tracker and Pathfinder are two microservices, as opposed to taking Cargo Tracker and functionally decomposing it into multiple microservices?
Correct. Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah. Okay. So, but if you want to do that, that's also possible. As you'll see, the concepts of modularity is built into domain-driven design. So if you wanted to go full-blown, like absolutely insane, like hundreds of deployed applications all over the place, you're welcome to do so.
That's always a tricky balance to make.
Right. Java EE or domain-driven design is not going to be in your way if that's what you want to do with your data center. Personally, I don't recommend doing that.
Sure.
But that's a discussion for another day, perhaps. Okay. All right. So if you look at Cargo Tracker, you'll notice that things are generally organized by layers. Okay. So you have the application layer, and the purpose of the application layer is to describe at a high level what the use cases are for the application. Okay, and we'll see what that means in just a second when I show you a component of the application layer. And then you also have the domain layer. Again, that has to do with the reflection of your domain model. There is the infrastructure layer, and you can see what types of infrastructure services I'm using. Right, so I'm using CDI events, messaging using JMS, persistence using JPA. I'm using an external routing service and the like.
So hold on those three packages, the fact that you have put the technology name into the package name, is that a personal choice, or is that recommended by DDD?
It's not recommended by DDD. It's a personal choice, and based on what I've seen in practice. So you could just say infrastructure.events and leave the CDI part out.
Okay.
And it's sort of what you want to do in terms of modularizing your application. I prefer to have this because it just at a high level makes me helps me understand what are the technologies I'm using.
Yeah.
Okay. There's also various interfaces, and again, if you look closely at the interfaces, you'll see that there is a normal UI, so that's the booking UI. And it has a facade elements to it. I don't think we'll be able to get to that level today, but basically this is using, it's treating the application actually as a separate, the UI portion actually as a separate part of the application. So again, if you wanted to go crazy, you could deploy your UI on a separate microservice and the rest of your backend services in another microservice, if that's what you want to do. But you'll also notice that we have REST-based interfaces, WebSocket-based interfaces, and the like. And you'll also see that the same thing for handling. There's a file-based interface, REST-based interface, and a web-based interface. Okay. So that, I guess, sort of maps to what it is that these guys do. So let me now dig into the code just a little bit more. So here's the internal booking service. Let's open this guy up. Actually, I'd like to start with the interface. So here's the application, and the one I'll start with is booking service, and this is actually the principal application layer component for the UI. Right? So it's called booking service, and it roughly corresponds again to the high-level use cases for this application. Okay, so we saw booking new cargo. We saw requesting possible routes for a cargo. That was the second step that I did. I took the booked cargo and I requested routes for it. Then I assigned the cargo to a specific route. I committed that cargo to that route, and again, that has to do with another use case in the application. I didn't show you changing destination, but you can also do that. You can say, hey, I have a registered bit of cargo. I'm going to change the destination. Yes, sir.
Now, this is this approach of using an interface and an implementation. Are you using this as a general design practice, or is that recommended by DDD?
It is not recommended by DDD. I'm again sort of applying my own experience and preferences into the implementation of DDD. So sure. I should mention this. So DDD actually is a very high-level design concept. It doesn't actually give you very many implementation recommendations per se. Right? So that actually is a good thing because it keeps things very loose in terms of it frees you up to do what you think is important for you, right? And the right thing for you. Right thing for me is to have an interface and an implementation. Well, why is that? The reason I like to have this is, imagine you are a new developer coming into this project. It's looking at this interface stripped of any implementation data is actually very helpful in getting familiarized with this application. Mm-hmm. So you're able to see right away, what is going on. You don't have to use an IDE. You can just pull up this text file and say, hey, this is what's going on in this application. But at the end of the day, basically, this is the application layer's purpose is to describe what model what the high-level use cases are for the application. It roughly translates to the session facade in the classical J2E architecture application.
Right.
Okay. Anything else, Aaron?
No, that's good. That's good, man. And in general, I think you put it rightly that this is, even though this is based upon your personal preference, but that is the recommended practice as well.
Yeah, certainly from my standpoint, sure. Yeah. Okay, so looking at the implementation of the default booking service, this is how it looks like. So it's a stateless EJB, which again, in my opinion, is a very, very important element in terms of mapping domain-driven design to Java EE. So because it represents the high-level use cases, the things that the application should do, it's actually a perfect place for an EJB because these methods generally will describe units of work, which is a place where you need transactions. So in general, all of these objects should be by default transactional. And in the real world, this actually works out very nicely because in terms of application server implementations, these services or these high-level application service objects will also be pooled. So there will be an upper bound threshold. So a lot of people talk about these days are talking about reactive programming and how being able to manage threads it leads to scalability. Well, Java EE has had that for a long time. It's called EJB pooling.
Yeah, yeah.
So again, it's a perfect fit for the application layer, and also in application servers like JBoss or Glassfish or WebSphere or WebLogic. There's diagnostic capabilities where you can open up the console to say, hey, what are the EJBs that I have deployed, and what are their runtime characteristics? What is their average response time? How many times has it failed? How many times has it succeeded? What's the average pool size? And lo and behold, it's just a beautiful visualization of what your application at a high level what your application does, and that monitoring console, because you're using domain-driven design to implement the application.
In addition, in Java EE 7, we also added the support for JSR 236, which says, hey, you don't like the EJB pooling of the app server, you want to do your own pooling, so go spin up your own threads and go crazy.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. So I'm injecting a bunch of services. So these are the components that the booking service is dependent upon.
So one quick question on the naming itself. When you're saying here, for example, default booking service or cargo repository, is that again a recommended design pattern that you use the word repository service so that it maps to the DDD?
Yes, the naming is absolutely recommended. So a service is an application service. A repository is an implementation of the repository and the like. So that's very important in terms of identifying the role of that component in your domain model.
Yeah.
In terms of default booking service, again, that's a personal preference. You could call it booking service impl, right, if you wanted to, or some other sensible name.
Yeah.
But I like the reason default booking service, the word default works for me is generally this maps to the default object that's injected in CDI.
Right.
And also if you do very fine-grained unit testing, you can then say test booking service, right, or default booking service or test booking service or mock booking service and the like, and it still keeps your domain model very, very clean from an implementation standpoint.
Right. No, I agree. I like the name, and I like that it's very clearly visible by just looking at the class name, whether it's a service or a repository or something else.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Okay. So we have I'm injecting a couple of repositories here. A routing service, and the routing service is actually a domain service. Okay. It's different from an application service. Application default booking service is an application service. It's modeling high-level use case, right? But the routing service is actually a domain-level concept. It's not an application-level concept. Again, I won't go into the full details of this. I'll leave that alone for now. Okay, so let's take a look at an implementation of, for example, book new cargo. Right. So over here, what you will see is that what is going on in this implementation is absolutely no business logic whatsoever. Okay, no business logic whatsoever. It's really coordination between parts of the domain, and namely the repositories, the value objects, the entities, and the factories. Okay, and in classical J2E, business logic would actually go in here. Okay, and in this case, there is no business logic here. It'll be even clearer if you look at, for example,
I think if you go back to book new cargo itself, I think one of the beauty that I see in that method is if I read, this particular method does not really require any documentation as such. If I read the code, oh, you know what? It's tracking the ID, it's finding the location, it's finding a destination, It's finding the route specification and saying go new cargo. That's it. So I can just read the code very clearly.
Right. So it'll be even clearer if you look at sort of a more businessy method like assign route to cargo. Okay, so again, we're taking a cargo that we've already registered and committing it to an itinerary that we've chosen among many choices. So again, you'll see no business logic here. It's just manipulation of the domain model. In reality, the business logic is actually in the domain object itself. So in this case, cargo is a domain entity. Okay, and the domain entity actually has behavior. So assigning route to a cargo is actually a behavior, right? That's realized not at the application layer but at the domain layer.
Yeah.
Okay, so if you look here, you'll see that there's a bunch of things going on. So we're updating on routing. Okay, digging into this. This requires creating a new delivery object, and in the delivery object is where you will see a lot of business logic. Okay, so calculating misdirected status, calculating the routing status, doing a whole bunch of business logic manipulation. This is all intrinsic to the domain model itself. And again, the delivery object is in the domain model, not at the application layer. So
Right.
that's the heart of object-oriented analysis and domain-driven design, is actually putting the business logic that is acting upon domain data closest to where the data is. Right? So
Right.
that at the heart is what's allowing you to create a very clean or cleaner domain model in the end. Okay, so
That's why the changes are also very localized. So if you know, like say, you want to make a change to assign to route, then that is one method. So you're really thinking of your business functions that needs to happen, defining your classes and packages and methods for that. That way, it allows a smoother communication between, the development and the business users.
exactly, yeah. Again, that's very intrinsic to what we're trying to accomplish. Okay, so now I'm going to jump in. We don't have a lot of time. I think we want to cut this off at an hour, right? Right,
Yeah.
Arun?
Yeah.
Okay.
So, one thing I do want to ask you is, and if you can spend some time on it, how do we take an existing Java EE application and refactor it into this?
Right, that's a very good question, and in fact, something that I've struggled with myself. So I will try to kind of relay my experience. Okay, so the domain, as I said, is broken down into parts, right? So these are actually what I was describing earlier as aggregates. So we have 4 different aggregates in this domain model. We have a cargo aggregate, a handling aggregate, a location aggregate, and a voyage aggregate. Each of these basically has grouped together the related entities and value objects. So these are the ones for voyage, for example. Okay, so these are the ones for cargo, for example. Okay, digging into more into cargo, this is an entity. Okay, this is the heart of what makes domain-driven design what it is. And lo and behold, well, guess what? It's actually a JPA entity, right? So there's almost a one-to-one mapping even in terms of naming in Java EE and naming in domain-driven design. Right? This is a noun in the system that has an identity, which is the definition of what a JPA entity is.
Right.
The big difference, yes, Arun?
No, that's okay. I was just acknowledging that.
Okay, yeah. So as you can see, data obviously, all of the any object in your domain model will have data. So you'll have an ID. You'll have various embedded objects. Again, representing the old concept of encapsulation. You'll have relationships to other entities. These relationships will typically be within the same aggregate, although it does not need to be, strictly speaking. But generally, they will tend to be within the same aggregate. So if you look at, for example, the delivery object, this is a value object. Okay. So this value object is basically, again, the same thing as an entity, same role as an entity. The distinction is that it doesn't have an ID, right? So it's not an entity, it's a value object. And again, there's a very nice one-to-one relationship between Java EE and domain-driven design. A value object is typically an embeddable.
Right.
In fact, if you can just imagine this embeddable annotation being called value object. This would be absolutely perfect and a perfect match.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. So beyond this, let me show you more of this. So as you can see in the constructor, there is business logic. Okay. And there's getters and setters, right? You can choose to have them or not have them. Again, that's a debate for another day. But basically, getters and setters. But also business logic, behavior. Okay. So specifying new route, assigning something to a route. Deriving delivery progress, these are all business logic related methods, and again modeled in the domain object itself. So both data and behavior. Okay, so I think that's all I have time for. Feel free to take a look at the application, and I think the website will help you quite a bit to understand what is going on in this application and why. And understanding the layers and the various various components.
So, okay, so that's awesome. Actually, that's pretty cool. Now, I am a Java EE developer. I have never done domain-driven design. How do I get started? I want to refactor my application to domain-driven design because I understand the benefits of it. Or my manager tells me, hey, you know what, just do your application using domain-driven design. How do I get started?
A very good question. So this is where the resources come in handy, and these are the resources, if you will. So the first resource is actually the canonical resource for learning domain-driven design is a book by a man named Eric Evans. He's really the guy that coined the term domain-driven design.
Right.
I will recommend not reading that book. Because I will tell you, domain-driven design, just like things like microservices and SOA, and unfortunately everything seemingly related to architecture, is written in a very, very abstract way, and it can be very intimidating. But once you really take the time to understand it, or somebody bothers to explain this to you, you'll see that it's actually very common sense. There's nothing very, very religious going on. Any of this. I'm talking about domain-driven design now. I'm not talking about microservices or SOA.
Right.
Okay, so what do you do? Honestly, the best thing to do, I don't want to sound like I'm talking down to somebody, but the best way to get started with domain-driven design is actually for the architect or the lead responsible for the project to sit down and explain domain-driven design, explain what the design philosophies are in the application. That's the best way to learn, especially for a beginner. Because that way, they're not just getting domain-driven design, they're also getting the particular implementation and the intent of the architect or designers of that application, okay, as it pertains to domain-driven design. Now, let's assume that that person doesn't exist. Your next bet is actually these few resources. So there's a very nice ref card, and I'm a fan of the D-Zone ref cards. There's a very nice ref card written by a person called Azla Khan. I think he's done a very good job of explaining basically at a high level what domain-driven design is and what the principal design patterns are. There's also a very thin, like a maybe 50-page book from InfoQ. It's called Domain-Driven Design Quickly. That again is a very good resource. And if you don't want to do any of that, you can actually just dive into Cargo Tracker itself. So I think we've done a decent job of documenting at a high level what these things are. So again, that URL is cargotracker.java.net. We do have a forum there, so we can certainly discuss elements of domain-driven design, that's unclear. Okay, and also there's lots of resources out there. There's an entire community of domain-driven design that you can also do the similar kind of thing. You can post questions and have discussions, and what you'll find out is often there's not black and white answers to everything. Okay, it's just a matter of understanding what other people's understanding is and then making your own interpretation. Okay, so the more practical question of, let's say you have an application that today either uses J2EE patterns or uses no patterns whatsoever. If you are actually properly using J2EE patterns, the good news is it's not a very big leap to start refactoring from J2E patterns into domain-driven design. So the approach I would take there is actually doing a gradual refactoring. So I would introduce domain-driven design in new components and new parts of the code, and gradually, as time allows, refactoring the old parts of the application into domain-driven design. If you have what I call cowboy architecture, then you are in trouble. It's going to take a lot of real architecture, hard architectural decisions and choices in order to really figure out what the right strategy is for going from no architecture to something as disciplined and well structured as domain-driven design.
Right. Now, typically, when I do my Java EE application, I might even have sort of a database. I've designed a database, and that sort of closely mimics typically to what my domain would look like. And then I might have some relationships and joins, etc. Are there any tools that you are aware of which would say, take my database table, generate my domain model?
Of course there is, yeah. So there's NetBeans has a wizard like that that you can take a database entity and generate, or rather a database or a table or what have you, and generate the corresponding JPA entities that you can then refactor to create a domain model. Yes, there is. Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I believe even JBoss Forge has a plugin like that that allows you to take a database table and create an entity from it.
Right. Okay. Any thoughts or considerations for testing such an application, or is it like a usual Java EE testing?
You have to if you look into the domain-driven design literature, domain-driven design is actually very complementary, and in fact, you can't do one or the other, one without the other. You definitely need elements of practical TDD, not religious TDD, and also practical BDD, behavior-driven development. You need practical elements of agile practices to make all of this work in the most effective way. So I've tried to start creating a test suite for Cargo Tracker. So my intent is definitely to have a pragmatic set of tests, BDD and TDD tests, to go with the application as well. So it's not, Cargo Tracker is, I guess, in the end, not just about domain-driven design either. Domain-driven design is the primary motivator, but it's also, in the end, perhaps even an example of pragmatic TDD or pragmatic BDD as well.
Okay. I think that's really good information. We are right at the top of the hour, actually. So, do you want to add any more last-minute bits?
Last-minute bits is we desperately need contributors. It's very hard for me to do my day-to-day, if you will, my day job at Oracle, and also try to run this project. Really would appreciate any help that anyone can provide.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I'll make sure that I highlight that in the blog that I write summarizing this. Excellent. Thank you, Reza. Thank you so much. I'm going to stop the broadcasting now.
Okay, very good.